GDP numbers for the third quarter released last Friday showed India's growth at 4.7%, the slowest in nearly 7 years. But the surprise factor was the upward revision of the first and second quarter GDP numbers, both by about 60 basis points. Along with this, Q1 and Q2 numbers for the previous year were also revised downwards. Now, this is raising questions for two reasons. One, that revisions usually take place at the end of the year when more data is available. And secondly, because there is no clarity on why these revisions to such a large extent were even needed. It's led to questions once again on India's data credibility, which is a serious and troubling one. Mythili, I want your take because, I remember Friday evening, all of us were looking at the numbers and, then it took some time to figure out the upward revision. First up, the question about this being a surprise. Give us context. Do numbers usually get revised at this point in the financial year?
Well, numbers are constantly revised for the simple reason, Tamanna, that data is constantly coming. So you get the final number for GDP for any particular year only after 3 years after the year has gone by. But what was surprising this time was a change in the quarterly numbers, not just in the quarterly GDP numbers, but also in the sectoral numbers. That means the sectoral growth numbers, the granular data also underwent revision and underwent very substantial revision. So that really was the element of surprise. But otherwise, revisions to GDP data are very common all over the world. In fact, I was looking up, I found that in Britain, the GDP data for 1959, if you look up, there are 18 different answers. So this is not to justify the fact that you need to make so many revisions, but since GDP is essentially an estimate, it is not mathematics, it is not a science, it is at best an approximation. So revisions are in order, but the revision should not be so large, it should be minimal. Because statistics, you always have an error term. The idea is that the error term should be small. So when the error term is so large, then questions are bound to be raised. The question is, was it deliberate? I do not think so. I think as more and more data comes in, these revisions are inevitable because we've shifted not only to a new base of 11-12, we've started using MCA data. We've also started now using GST data. So you have two databases of both MCA as well as GST, which have not stabilized. So I think this will continue for some time. Hopefully the noise will settle down soon.
Hopefully the noise will settle down, but is the noise justified? We're focusing on the noise because we've discussed the numbers in great detail when they came out on Friday. Professor Nagaraj, I just want to get your take. The context of this is not merely why there was a revision. It is about the overhang of accusations that credibility of our data is being questioned more and more. And in that context, when you have such a wide jump, do you think there was a clear enough explanation for those differences?
Yeah, right. GDP numbers have been disputed for a long time now, since 2015. But the present issue of quarterly GDP is slightly different. Yes, quarterly GDP estimates undergo enormous revisions, or at least 4 or 5 revisions they undergo. So I think the downgrading of Q1, Q2 estimates for the last year, that is 2018-19, is not something surprising. And immediately one need not jump to the conclusion that this puts a question mark on the credibility of the quarterly GDP estimates. So let me say this. See, quarterly GDP estimates are by and large based on rates and proportions. They are not very much based on primary data from the ground. Okay, so therefore I usually do not comment on the quarterly numbers. Okay, because they undergo fair amount of changes. Okay, but having said that, I would say that the latest revision which has happened, which came out on Friday, which shows that the third quarter number is 4.7%, which is declined from the previous two quarters as per the latest estimates. Okay, so many people have questioned that the upward revision of the Q1, Q2 numbers seems to be on account of some credibility issues. I do not see it that way. I see that the downward revision of the previous year's numbers is a fairly routine matter. It could have gone down, it could have gone up. So I need not. I mean, I am not. I do not attribute any data credibility issues at this for these numbers. I think this is a very routine matter.
Okay.
I think one should not get too worked up about the quarterly GDP numbers.